Welcome, dear listener, to Buddha Bedtime Stories. What you're about to hear is not just a recording, it's a moment of remembering what the old teachers knew, what the wind over the mountain knew, what your heart has always known. This is a time for softening, a time for stillness, a time to let go of your name, your roles, your plans, and simply return to being. But before we walk further down this path together, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it for you right now in this moment? It's a quiet comfort to know that across oceans and mountains, others are pausing too, breathing, listening, letting go. Tonight, I'll share with you a series of gentle Zen and Buddhist stories, each one a soft footstep across the inner landscape of the mind. Some stories will confuse the thinking mind. That's their gift. Others will comfort. That's their grace. You don't need to figure anything out. Let each word be a drop of still water. Let each silence between the words stretch like dusk across a calm sky. The teachings will meet you where you are. All you have to do is listen. Let me start by sharing the first story. She never meant harm. She only passed on what she heard. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there, a half-finished sentence passed along like a secret prayer. Her name was Sister Nima, young, lively, kind mostly, but her words moved quickly and quietly unraveled the thread of trust inside the temple. At first, it was small. She meditates longer when people are watching. They say the head cook isn't really vegetarian. I heard the abbot used to be married. No malice, just conversation, just sharing. But soon, monks began to turn away from each other in the corridor. Silent meals grew tenser. Chanting lost its rhythm. Smiles stiffened at the edges. No one named the cause, but it lingered, like smoke with no fire. One afternoon, the abbot asked Sister Nima to join him in the garden. The plum trees were beginning to blossom, delicate petals stirring in the breeze. He held a small bag in his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. They walked in silence down the path that circled the temple grounds. After a while, he opened the bag and began to scatter chicken feathers along the way. Sister Nima tilted her head. "Why are you doing that?" The abbot didn't answer. When they returned to the garden, he handed her the empty bag. "Now," he said, "go and collect them all." She blinked. "But the wind's taken them. They're scattered everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "So too with your words." That night she wept. This is the story of speech and consequence, of how sound can build or destroy. Commentary. In Buddhist practice, right speech is one of the Eightfold Path's pillars. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest, because words don't vanish when we stop speaking. They ripple, they stain, they take root in someone else's mind, sometimes forever. Sister Nima did not speak with cruelty, but neither did she speak with care. And in that space, in the absence of intention, harm took hold. We often forget how powerful language is. A word can lift someone from despair or push them over the edge. It can invite reflection or ignite shame. Words are not just air. They are actions. They build worlds. There's a Zen saying, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Sister Nima filled silence with curiosity, suspicion, drama, and the silence grew quieter, but colder, until no one trusted what they didn't hear. The Buddha once said, "A person is not wise because they speak much. A person is wise when they speak what is true and what causes no harm." That is the gate of right speech. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it fails even one, it's better to let it drift away like a feather on the wind. After that night, Sister Nima changed. She stopped repeating what others said. She listened more, spoke less. When she did speak, her words came slowly, like water poured from a clean bowl. The monks began to look at her differently, not because she had become wise overnight, but because she was watching herself now, watching what she left behind in others when she spoke. And over time, trust returned to the temple, not because of a sermon, not because of a rule, but because one person saw the feathers scatter and chose to stop scattering more. So speak with care. Speak like you're building something with your breath. Because you are. Every sentence is a seed, and whether it blooms or bruises is up to you. The tree stood at the edge of the world. Its roots gripped the earth like memory. Its branches reached toward the sky like longing, and beneath it sat a man, still as a mountain, breathing, watching, waiting. His name had once been Siddhartha, but that name now lay behind him, like a robe folded and left at the forest's edge. He had left palaces, left hunger, left both indulgence and denial. And now, with the moon rising above the horizon and the world softening into dusk, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, not in search, but in surrender. His legs were crossed, his hands rested lightly in his lap. The breath moved through him like wind through reeds, slow, even, empty of grasping. He had made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I see clearly, until I find the end of suffering. And so the night began. The stars emerged like scattered seeds across the dark. The forest exhaled. Animals stirred. The air cooled. Siddhartha's mind turned inward, like a lamp flame drawing into itself. He began to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. Visions came, clear, unforced, as if someone were whispering his past to him, life by life. He saw himself born in countless forms, as man, as woman, as child, as beast, as merchant, as slave, as prince, as pauper, each life blooming and withering, each desire rising and fading, each birth followed by loss. He saw himself die 1,000 deaths, not with fear, but with clarity, and for the first time he understood. The self is not fixed. It moves, it changes, it clings, it returns. He watched the thread of his existence unspool across time, and yet something beyond the thread remained still. He did not speak, he did not stir, but inside him, a door creaked open, and he stepped through. Midnight deepened. The forest held its breath. The moon climbed higher, softening the world in silver. Now he turned his gaze outward, not with judgment, but with compassion. He saw the lives of others, their births and deaths, their joys and sorrows, rising and falling like waves. He saw kings and criminals, lovers and thieves, monks and warriors, all bound by the same law, karma, intentions like seeds, actions like water, and from them the fruits of joy or suffering. He saw that no life stood alone. Each was a thread in a vast net. Each thought, each choice, each word sent ripples outward, reaching far beyond the speaker, the thinker, the doer. He saw how hatred returned as hatred, how greed bore more hunger, how ignorance looped endlessly like a wheel spinning in sand. And he saw too how kindness softened sorrow, how generosity opened hearts, how truth, spoken gently, could shatter lifetimes of illusion. And still he sat, breathing, watching. The net of becoming stretched before him, vast, intricate, impossible to escape. Unless one saw the threads for what they were, not chains, but illusions. He closed his eyes, and the world began to tremble. The deepest hour of night, not even owls cried now, not even leaves moved, and within him, the final door unlocked. He turned his mind to the cause of suffering. Why do we suffer? Why do we cling? Why do we fear? And the answer rose, not like thunder, but like morning, clear, simple, radiant. He saw it all in a single breath. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging leads to becoming. Becoming to birth. Birth to sorrow, decay, and death. And so the wheel turns. Again and again. But he also saw how it could be stopped. Not with violence, not with denial, but with clarity. With the eightfold path. Like stepping stones across a great river. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He saw that suffering was not a punishment, nor a curse, nor a mystery. It was a path, and paths could be walked, and walked until they ended. And as the final shadow lifted from his mind, as the first bird stirred in the distant branches. It happened, not a flash, not a voice, not a miracle, but a knowing, a deep, still knowing. He had awoken. The sun crested the hills, slow and golden. The mist curled like incense through the trees. And Siddhartha, now the Buddha, opened his eyes. He looked out over the world, not with desire, not with fear, but with compassion so vast it had no name. He saw children born into love and hunger. He saw soldiers sharpening swords. He saw merchants counting coins. He saw mothers weeping over small graves. And he wept, not with sadness, but with tenderness. Because they were all still sleeping, not foolish, not broken, just dreaming. He had been asleep once too, and now he was awake. It is said that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, came one last time, not with armies, not with demons, but with a whisper. Now that you are free, he said, leave them behind. They will not understand. They will mock you. They will twist your words. They will forget. And the Buddha listened. He sat with that thought, the thought of peace in solitude, of disappearing into the forest, of vanishing beyond suffering alone. But then He saw a farmer rising to begin the day. He saw a child carrying water. He saw a girl humming a tune she did not know was ancient. And he knew they were not lost. Just tired, just waiting. Just needing someone to show them the way back to themselves. So he turned to Mara and said, "They will understand. Some will. Even one is enough." And Mara vanished. He stood slowly, the grass beneath him still wet with dew. His knees ached, but his heart did not. He took his bowl, his robe, his breath, and began to walk. Toward the village, toward the people, toward the long road of teaching. He would speak not of gods, nor of punishments, nor of sacred fire, but of suffering, and how to end it, of breath, and how to follow it, of kindness, and how to live it. And so the man who once left his son sleeping, who had starved beneath trees, who had faced demons and silence and the unraveling of self, walked down from the Bodhi tree. And the world, though it did not know it yet, had already begun to wake. Because one man had seen clearly, had sat still, had not run, and had touched the truth. And from that stillness, a path was born for all the world to walk. There was once a wealthy man who lived in a great house. The house was vast, with many rooms, winding corridors, tall beams and ancient wood. But it was old and dry, and one day it caught fire. Smoke slipped beneath the doors, flames curled along the rafters, the walls creaked with heat, and the embers began to rise. Inside the house were his children, dozens of them, laughing, playing, unaware. He called out to them from the courtyard, "Come out, the house is burning." But the children only blinked. The house was all they had known. It was familiar, full of games and colours and corners to hide. They did not see the danger. They did not feel the urgency. They went on playing. The man's heart pounded. The flames licked closer. If he shouted again, they might ignore him. If he ran in to fetch them, the structure might collapse. So instead, he tried something else. He called out again, not with panic, but with a new offer. "Children, come outside. There are carts waiting for you. Goat carts, deer carts, ox carts, pulled by beautiful animals adorned with bells and gold. Come now, and they are yours." The children stopped, looked up, and ran out of the burning house in delight. Safe, laughing, alive. But when they reached the courtyard, there were no goat carts or deer carts. Only one great cart, drawn by a white ox, sturdy, wide, strong, more magnificent than they could have imagined. And the father, calm now, relieved, invited each child onto the cart. It would carry them far from danger. It would hold them safely. This is the parable of the burning house, one of the most famous teachings in the Lotus Sutra. It is not about deception. It is about skillful means, what Mahayana Buddhism calls upaya. It is about the wisdom to speak not with rigid truth, but with compassion shaped to the listener's heart. The father in the story is the Buddha. The burning house is samsara, the world of illusion, suffering, impermanence. The children are us, unaware, absorbed in our games, our distractions, our beliefs that everything is fine. And the carts? They are the paths, the ways we are called out of delusion. Sometimes we need promises. Sometimes we need symbols. Sometimes we come to practice seeking peace or healing or clarity. These may not be ultimate truth, but they are ways out of the fire. And the Buddha, seeing this, offers whatever will work, not to lie, but to save. Truth is not always about telling the whole thing at once. Sometimes it's about offering a step forward, a thread through the smoke, a voice that reaches someone where they are, not where they should be. There is a famous Mahayana saying, "The Dharma is like a raft used to cross the river, but once across, you don't carry the raft on your back." In the same way, the Buddha does not cling to doctrines. He uses teachings as tools and discards them when they no longer serve. In the story, the children are not punished for believing in goat carts, because the Buddha is not interested in being right. He is interested in awakening, and if it takes a golden bell or a beautiful cart to bring someone to safety, then so be it, because wisdom without compassion is incomplete. Sometimes we do the same. We come to practice for small reasons. We want to breathe better, to sleep more easily, to escape stress, but slowly, something shifts. The real ox cart arrives. The deeper teachings come. We begin to see the house for what it is. We begin to wake up, not just from the flames, but from the idea that we ever truly belonged inside them. This story teaches us about timing, about patience, about knowing that not every truth needs to be told at once, and that helping others awaken is not about shouting, "The house is on fire." It's about seeing what they hear, what they fear, what they love, and then speaking to that. The Buddha could have thundered teachings from the sky. He could have demanded obedience. Instead, he walked with people, listened, adapted, and then gave them the vehicle they were ready for. Some criticize this parable. They say, "Wasn't it a lie?" But what matters is the result. The children were safe, and the vehicle they received was not lesser, but greater. They were drawn to joy, but found liberation. Sometimes a mother tells a child there are stars hiding behind the clouds, not to mislead, but to soothe. And the stars are there. Sometimes a doctor gives medicine sweetened with honey, because healing must be palatable, not just potent. And so too with the Dharma, it meets us where we are, and leads us to where we didn't even know we could go. The burning house is this world, not because the world is evil, but because it cannot last. Everything inside it, pleasure, power, possession, even identity, will one day fall. But the Buddha doesn't shame us for being inside. He simply calls us out, however he can. You may be on a goat cart path now, or waiting by the door, or still deep inside the house, holding on to something you love. It's okay. You are seen, and when you're ready, there will be a voice, and a cart, and a way through the smoke. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. A monk once asked his teacher, "Master, where does the path to enlightenment begin?" The teacher did not answer. Instead, he stood up, walked across the room, and swept the floor. Later that night, the monk asked again, "Then where does it end?" The teacher looked up from pouring tea and said, "If it ends, it was never the way." This is the story of non-arrival, the path that unfolds not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. Long ago, in a forest monastery, a wandering monk arrived seeking answers. He had studied every scripture, debated with scholars, and meditated in caves for years. And yet, he felt restless, incomplete, as if truth always lived just beyond the next bend. He bowed to the abbot and said, "I have walked many roads. I seek the one that leads to awakening." The abbot nodded and replied, "Very well. Walk with me tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, they walked. Through bamboo groves, past quiet ponds, up rocky trails where mist clung to the earth like breath. They walked all day. The monk said little. By dusk, they had returned to where they started. The monk frowned. "You promised to show me the path." The abbot said, "I did. We walked it." The monk blinked. "But we arrived nowhere." The abbot smiled. "Exactly." The student wanted something linear, a goal, a peak. A moment where the sky split open and declared, "Here it is." But the Dharma is not a destination. It is the walking itself. It is the attention you give to each step, the space between one breath and the next. The Buddha did not climb a holy mountain to reach truth. He sat under a tree and stopped seeking. You do not become awake like winning a race. You remember the truth that was always here. Under the hurry, beneath the striving, inside the stillness of the now. When we think of progress, we think forward, farther, better, beyond. But what if the path moves deeper, not farther, inward, not onward? Like returning to the place you began, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The monk eventually understood. He stopped chasing high teachings, stopped measuring his worth by distance traveled. He began to walk slowly. He bowed to doorways, thanked his bowl before eating, washed his feet with care, and in those simple moments, something softened, something opened. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change, but the one doing them no longer seeks to arrive. He is already home. In the end, the way is not mystical. It is making tea without rushing. It is folding robes with full attention. It is greeting the morning with breath instead of thought. And in those everyday movements, the path walks itself. The old abbot left behind a note before his passing. It read, "Those who hurry are carried by illusion. Those who walk with it vanish into the way." The monk later became a teacher. When asked by a student, "Where is the path?" he would only point at the floor beneath their feet. "Here," he'd say. "Now walk." So if you are still searching, still waiting to feel worthy, enlightened, or arrived, pause. Notice your breath. Feel your weight on the earth. Let this moment be enough, because the greatest truth, there is nowhere to get to, and still, you walk. It happened in the monastery courtyard. A cat had wandered in from the fields, slim, white-pawed, with eyes like river stones. The novices argued over it. "Let it stay," said one group. "It brings joy. We feed it. It purrs. It lives among us." "No," said the other group. "It distracts us during zazen. It chases the sparrows. It has no place in a temple of silence." The voices rose. One claimed compassion, another claimed discipline. Both believed they were right, but neither listened, and so they argued, loudly, endlessly, until the abbot, Master Nansen, appeared. He said nothing at first. He looked at the cat, then at the monks, then back at the cat. In one swift motion, he drew his blade from beneath his robe, held it high, and said, "If any of you can say a true word, this cat will be spared." Silence. No one spoke. The wind stirred. The cat blinked, and then the blade flashed, and the cat was gone. That is the story, told for centuries across temples and texts, debated, feared, questioned, but never forgotten. Later that evening, Master Nansen told the story to Yoshu, his senior student. Joshu did not argue. He did not recoil. He simply took off his sandals, placed them on his head, and walked out of the room. Nansen smiled. "If you had been there," he said, "the cat would have lived." What does it mean? Why such violence? Why the silence? Why would a master of compassion raise a blade? And why was Yoshu's nonsense, putting sandals on his head? The answer Nansen was waiting for. This is not a story about a cat. It is a story about attachment to views, about how quickly the mind clings to being right, how debates, even over seemingly noble things like kindness or rules, can become distractions. The monks thought they were arguing about the cat, but really, they were arguing from ego, from the illusion of my view versus yours. And Nansen saw it, in their noise, in their stubbornness, in their refusal to let go. He saw a sickness, and he responded not with teaching, not with reasoning, but with cutting. In Zen, cutting is not always physical. It is the sudden strike that breaks the mind free from duality. It is the moment the raft is kicked away, because it's become another attachment. It is the sharpness that leads to stillness, like a thunderclap that silences thought, like a stone thrown into still water, breaking the surface so deeply that the ripples stop altogether. The blade in this story is not just steel. It is a mirror, and what it reflects is uncomfortable, because the cat is not just a cat. It is that which we cling to while pretending to care. It is the debate that becomes a disguise for control. It is the idea of rightness that replaces actual presence. When Nansen raised the sword and said, "Say a true word," he wasn't asking for logic. He wasn't asking for poetry. He was asking for being, for someone to drop the debate, to step beyond language, to show life, not defend it. No one spoke. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they were still stuck in thinking, still stuck in sides, still holding on. But Joshu, when he heard the story, he didn't try to argue it. He didn't try to defend the monks or condemn the master. He didn't even say a word. He simply placed his sandals, dusty, humble, ordinary, on his head, and walked out. Nonsense? Perhaps, or perhaps, a true word without speech, a gesture so absurd that it shattered meaning altogether. No logic, no stance, just presence breaking form, just action beyond thought, just emptiness wearing a shoe. Nansen smiled, because truth had finally moved. Not in words, not in argument, but in surrender. Commentary. This koan disturbs many because it seems violent. But Zen does not condone cruelty. It uses imagery not to glorify pain, but to jolt the mind awake. The cat is not the victim. The cat is everything we refuse to let go of while pretending we've let go. Your opinions, your need to win, your identification with spiritual knowledge. The cat is the argument that's gone on too long. The debate over kindness that's become unkind. The need to control the uncontrollable. And Nansen sees that no answer can reach those trapped in duality. Only a cut. Only a break. Only a moment so sharp that the mind has no time to resist. Zen is not safe. Not because it is cruel, but because it does not protect your illusions. It won't nod along to your spiritual ego. It won't politely entertain your ideas about Zen. It will instead hold up the blade, not to harm you, but to cut away what you're not, so that what remains is true. You cannot think your way out of illusion. Sometimes you have to shock yourself awake, to see the cat, to see the blade, to see the silence after both are gone, and then to walk out of the room with sandals on your head. Because in that moment, nothing makes sense. And finally, you begin to see it was a quiet station. Old stone, metal benches, pigeons pacing like monks in mourning robes. The arrivals board flickered. The loudspeaker crackled, and trains came and went, their breath hissing across the platform like tired beasts. Every day just before noon, an old man would arrive. He wore a flat cap, pressed slacks, a wool coat that had seen better winters. He never boarded. He never greeted anyone. He simply sat. Same bench, same hour, same stillness. At first, people thought he was waiting for someone. A son, a daughter, a wife who might never arrive. They glanced at him with quiet sympathy or soft dismissal, but the days passed. Then weeks, and he was always there, alone, unbothered, still. One day, a young woman sat beside him. She was holding a phone in one hand, tapping constantly, half listening to music in the other ear. She kept checking the time, fidgeting, breathing shallow. The old man looked out at the tracks, unmoving. After a while, she said, almost without looking, "Who are you waiting for?" He smiled. "Nothing." She blinked. "Then why are you here?" He paused, then nodded toward the platform. To wait. This is the story of presence, of sitting in stillness with no outcome, no expectation, and no rush. Commentary. The world runs on arrival. We hurry to meetings, chase after goals, measure our worth by progress, but in the Dharma, there is no arrival, only presence. The old man wasn't avoiding life. He was stepping into it, minute by minute, footstep by breath, like a bell that rings just once, not to announce anything, but because it can. At first, the young woman scoffed. She muttered, "That's kind of pointless." The old man nodded. Yes, and peaceful. She paused, looked at him fully for the first time. There was something settled in his face, not detached, just done chasing. He didn't ask her what she did for work, didn't comment on the news, didn't offer advice. He just sat and breathed. The train came. She didn't get on. Instead, She silenced her music, turned off her phone, sat beside him. They shared the silence for half an hour. It was the first silence she'd had in weeks. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The old man said none, and yet peace lingered around him like perfume. He came every day, even in the rain, umbrella in hand, thermos of tea, soft eyes and unhurried limbs. He didn't come to do anything. He came to stop doing. We often misunderstand waiting. We think it's the pause before real life. But sometimes, waiting is life, not for something, but with it. Eventually, the young woman started visiting more often. She brought tea, sat on the same bench, and didn't speak, until one day she asked, "What if the person you were waiting for never comes?" The old man looked at her with a calm smile. "Then I'll still be here." That's the power of presence. It doesn't depend on outcome. It doesn't beg for fulfillment. It simply is. In time, others noticed. A mother sat for 5 quiet minutes with her son. A commuter took off his headphones. A woman reading poetry closed her book and just watched the clouds drift. No one spoke, but something was shifting. Not loudly, not suddenly, like morning fog lifting, unnoticed. And then, one spring day, the old man stopped coming. His bench stayed empty, but the silence remained. So did the stillness, and the space he had created. By doing nothing, expecting nothing, needing nothing. Wasn't empty, it was full of something rare. Peace. The young woman still visits the bench, not daily, not ritually, just when the world starts rushing too fast. She sits, breathes, smiles at passing trains, and once when a man sat beside her and asked, "Who are you waiting for?" she answered, "No one." Then added, "I'm just here." As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The path was dry that day. Dust lifted from the earth like breath from grief. It clung to her ankles, soft and persistent. But Kisa Gotami did not notice. Her feet moved forward, bare and steady. Her arms, once empty with loss, now carried the truth. It had been some years since she had fallen at the feet of the Buddha, begging for medicine to save her dead child. Then, he had sent her through the city, asking for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death. At every door she knocked, and at every door sorrow had already sat before her. Now she understood, no house was free from loss. But this story begins not with her arrival, nor her wisdom, but with the silence before it. Kisa Gotami was once radiant with joy. She had married into wealth, borne a healthy son, and laughed easily beneath flowering trees. Her life was not lavish, but it was full. Her husband was kind. Her in-laws praised her for her quiet strength and good nature. And her child was the axis of her world. His laugh echoed through the garden, a sound so bright it seemed to ripple the petals of the lotus pond. But when sickness came, it moved like fire in dry grass. First, a fever, then the cough, then the silence. Her husband wept, her in-laws prayed. Neighbors brought herbs, ointments and whispered remedies passed down through generations. But nothing stilled the trembling of the boy's limbs. Nothing cooled his burning skin. And then, one still morning, as dew clung to the leaves and the world turned quietly onward, he stopped breathing. Something in Kisa Gotami's mind refused the truth. It broke, not like glass, but like a door slammed shut against a storm. She did not bury him. She could not. Instead, she wrapped his small body in linen and cradled him close, as she always had. She walked barefoot through the streets, her face blank with disbelief, her voice hollow with pleading. "He is only sleeping," she whispered to merchants. "There must be something, some medicine, some root. Please help me wake him." People pitied her. Some turned away, ashamed. Others wept at the sight but dared not speak. A few offered dried herbs or quiet prayers, not to cure, but to comfort. But none could give her what she asked for. Then one old man, gentle and weathered like the bark of the Bodhi tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. He sees clearly. Perhaps he will know what to do." So she did. Through dust and heat, she walked to the monastery, her arms still wrapped around the stillness of her child. Her eyes, dry now, saw only hope. When she reached him, the Buddha met her gaze with unwavering calm. He did not flinch at the bundle in her arms. He did not speak quickly or softly or with sorrow. He simply said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home where death has not visited. Then I will help." Kisa Gotami bowed deeply, grateful beyond words, and ran. House after house, door after door. She knocked. She asked. She waited. At the first door, a woman with kind eyes shook her head. "My brother died last winter," she said. "I'm sorry." At the next, a man held his son in his arms and said, "If only. We lost his mother at childbirth." At another, a young girl barely older than her own son opened the door, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Grandfather passed last night," she whispered. Each story struck her not like a blow, but like a chisel, slowly carving away at her illusion. With every encounter, her burden changed. The weight of the child in her arms remained the same, but the grief within her no longer stood alone. It became something shared. A river of sorrow running through many homes, not just hers. And in that shared space, she found the first breath of peace. She returned. She did not knock this time. She did not beg. She simply walked to the Buddha and placed the body of her son before him. Then quietly she said, "I see now. There is no house without sorrow." The Buddha nodded, and without ceremony, without demand, he welcomed her into the Sangha. She shaved her head, took on the robes, learned to breathe again, learned to walk not to escape grief, but to carry it with grace. The seasons passed like silk through her fingers. She became a teacher, not of words, but of presence. Her voice was never the loudest, nor her gestures the grandest. But when she sat beside those in pain, their breathing slowed, their trembling eased. She was the stillness they had forgotten could exist. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the bamboo grove, a young woman arrived at the monastery. Her face was drawn with confusion. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, but not yet emptied of tears. She had lost her father. Suddenly, cruelly. Though she had performed all the rites, burned all the offerings, sat in silence beside her mother, Something inside her chest would not still. "I do not know what to do with this ache," she said. She asked for Kisa Gotami. The nun sat beside her beneath a neem tree. Birds moved through the leaves above them, and the distant sound of sweeping could be heard from the monastery steps. Kisa did not rush. She listened, let silence breathe between them. Then she placed a small, smooth pebble in the girl's palm. "Carry this," she said, "for 3 days, but each day speak to one person about someone they have lost. Ask for their story, then return." The girl did as told, and on the 3rd morning she returned, eyes swollen, chest raw, but breath moving freely. She knelt at Kisa's feet and wept, but the tears came with space, with rhythm, with healing. "I thought I was alone," she said. Kisa Gotami nodded. "Grief is a shadow," she said. "It grows darker when we sit beneath it alone. But when we share it, it moves, it thins, it teaches." The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What did it teach you?" Kisa looked to the far hills, where the morning light softened the edges of the earth. "That the heart does not break from love," she said, "but from the illusion that love can be possessed. My child was not mine. He was a gift. So were the mornings we shared, the soft sound of his feet, the questions he asked at twilight. His death was not punishment. It was part of the changing tide. We do not own the ocean, but we can learn to swim." The girl placed her hand over her heart. "Will this ache ever leave?" "No," Kisa said gently, "but it will grow roots, and from those roots something will bloom. You will never be the same, but you may become more." The girl bowed low, forehead touching earth, and so another seed was planted. Not of mustard, but of compassion. Kisa Gotami came to be known not for her loss, but for her light, for the way she listened without rushing, spoke without preaching, held without clutching. She walked through villages not to convert, but to sit, to be, to remind those in pain that no house stands outside sorrow, and no heart must bear it alone. Thus, the lesson of the mustard seed lived on, not in the search, but in the returning, not in the seed itself, but in the soil of shared humanity it revealed. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so—" "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom. It's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. All three of you are correct, he said, depending on how you define freedom. He continued, most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us. He looked out the open window. But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances. The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, I failed. There was a pause. One novice finally asked, then what is the lesson, Master? Shiro replied softly, there are times to steer and times to yield. He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. You cannot hold the wind in your hands, he said, but you can feel its path against your face. He paused, and when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm. The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, carried, yet free. There's a saying in Chan Buddhism. The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass. The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. At the corner of Maple and Fifth, there stood a little cafe that never advertised. No neon signs, no digital menus. Just a chalkboard easel that read, come in, breathe, sip slowly. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and ground espresso lingered like an old song. And behind the counter moved Raya. She didn't move quickly, not because she was lazy, but because every motion mattered. Scoop, steam, pour, wipe. A rhythm of care, repeated hundreds of times a day. Customers noticed. They came stressed, hurried, multitasking, but left quieter. Because somehow, even in the rush of morning lines, Raya made you feel like time had paused. She wore no uniform, only soft linen aprons and a tiny brass bell around her wrist. It didn't jingle constantly. Just gently, when she turned or wiped the counter or placed a mug just right. A small sound, but intentional. One day, a man asked her, "What's the bell for? Aesthetic?" Raya smiled. "It's a reminder," she said, "to return to the moment." The bell had come from a monastery in Korea, a gift from a traveling monk who had passed through one rainy morning, soaked to the bone, but smiling like the clouds had kissed him. He'd ordered chamomile tea, sat for an hour, said nothing, and when he left, he gave her the bell. "For your practice," he had whispered. At first, she didn't know what he meant. But over time, she came to understand. Every chime was a callback. Back to the steam rising from the milk. Back to the texture of ceramic under her fingertips. Back to the presence of the person in front of her. One regular, a nurse named Ellie, used to joke, "You're the only person who can make caffeine feel calming." Raya just laughed, but she knew why. It wasn't the coffee, it was the attention. The Buddha once said, "When walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. Above all, don't wobble." Raya lived that. In a world addicted to wobbling. One afternoon, a man burst in, frantic. His phone had died. He was late for a pitch. He spilled his order twice in his rush. But Raya didn't scold. She simply placed the cup on the counter slowly. Her bell chimed. He paused, looked up. And in that pause, he breathed. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Presence doesn't need hours. It needs moments, noticed fully. Years passed. The cafe stayed small, never franchised, never changed hands, but its walls soaked in thousands of quiet returns. One morning, Raya didn't show up. A handwritten sign appeared. "Back in 3 days, practicing stillness." Customers waited, and when she returned, they smiled. Because somehow, her absence had reminded them. Even a barista needs to refill the cup. The bell still chimed, still soft, still enough. A sound that said, "You're here, be here." With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly, "let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujata, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. "Perhaps some of you think, the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now. But that is not so." His voice was calm, though each word required effort. "You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter." A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, "All compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence." He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the 4 jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. "He is gone," he said softly, voice breaking. "No," whispered another monk, a younger one. "He is everywhere now." The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally. enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash, it was the teaching, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence, others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it, strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. The leaves whispered of him before his name ever reached a village gate. Parents clutched their children. Merchants rerouted their caravans. Monks bowed their heads, not in reverence, but in caution. For the man they called Angulimala roamed the forests like a curse in flesh. They said he wore a garland of severed fingers. They said he moved like wind through tall grass, too fast, too silent, too deadly. They said he had no soul, but the truth was more complicated. He had once been ahimsaka, a child born to a noble Brahmin family, gentle, studious, with a heart like spring water, clear, eager, pure. His name meant harmless, and for a time it fit. His parents glowed with pride. His teachers praised his mind. He recited texts with ease and never raised his voice. He walked the sacred path with reverence. But even gardens grow shadows, and in the heart of his teacher, a master once kind, jealousy stirred like embers beneath calm. What if this boy outshines me? What if he is remembered while I am forgotten? And so, the poison was planted. Whispers behind closed doors. Lies dropped like oil into water. The teacher turned the other students against ahimsaka. Then, turning to the boy himself, he spoke. If you truly wish to complete your training, bring me a gift. 1,000 lives, 1,000 fingers. Ahimsaka was horrified, but loyalty ran deep, and confusion deeper still. His world, once steady, spun sideways. The teachings twisted, the compass lost. And so he walked into the forest, heart trembling, mind clouded. At first, he resisted. Then, he rationalized. Then, he obeyed. One by one, lives fell. One by one, fingers were taken. He strung them on a garland around his neck, not out of pride, but as proof. A grotesque tally, a vow he could not break. Ahimsaka was gone. Only Angulimala remained. Years passed. Villages emptied at the sound of his approach. No warrior could stop him. No plea could reach him. He lived in the trees like a demon, fed by fear, haunted by silence. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the river and weep, not loudly, not dramatically, just a single, soundless shudder, as if his soul still remembered what it used to be. Then came the day everything changed. A new rumor reached the region. A monk in saffron robes was walking the land, barefoot and alone, unarmed, unafraid. His presence turned swords to dust. His gaze stilled storms. The Buddha. Angulimala laughed when he heard it. "Let him come," he said. "Let me take his finger too." And so he waited. It was mid-morning when the figure appeared, walking slowly along the forest path, robe brushing the grass, eyes lowered, bowl in hand. No fear, no hesitation. Angulimala stepped out from the trees, blade drawn. But the monk did not stop, nor did he hurry, just walked. Calm, present, silent. Something in Angulimala snapped. With a roar he charged. The earth pounded beneath him. His breath came wild. His blade glinted in the sun. But no matter how fast he ran, the monk remained just ahead, neither speeding up nor slowing down, until suddenly he stopped and turned. Their eyes met. The forest held its breath. Angulimala's chest heaved. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop walking!" And the Buddha spoke, calm, clear, eternal. "I have already stopped, Angulimala. It is you who has not." The words hit harder than any weapon. Stopped? The monk had stopped? Angulimala blinked. "What do you mean?" "I have stopped chasing harm, stopped feeding the fires of anger, greed, and ignorance. But you still run." Angulimala lowered his sword. "Not all the way, just a little, but enough." What should I do?" And the Buddha stepped closer, unshaken, unarmed, unafraid. "Drop the weapon," he said, "and follow." For a long moment, Angulimala stood frozen. The forest was silent. Even the wind waited. Then, with trembling hands, the man removed the garland from his neck. Each finger clattered to the ground, like a lifetime falling apart. He dropped the sword and fell to his knees. "I don't know how to walk your path," he whispered. The Buddha extended a hand, not to lift, but to witness. "You already have," he said. The townspeople were outraged. When word spread that Angulimala, the killer, the terror, the demon of the forest, had become a monk, they rioted. They threw stones at him as he walked. They spat at his feet. They demanded his blood. But he did not strike back. He carried his bowl. He bowed when struck. He sat in silence and wept again, but not for himself. For them, one day after a particularly violent outburst from the crowd, he returned to the monastery bruised and bleeding. The Buddha looked at him, eyes deep as sky. "You endure much, Angulimala." Angulimala bowed his head. "I deserve it." "The past is a shadow," the Buddha said. "It follows you until you stop turning to chase it." One morning, he heard a woman crying in labor outside the village. The pain was great, the danger greater, but the people refused to help. "She's cursed," they whispered. "Her child will be born into blood." Angulimala stepped forward. "I will go." The villagers gasped. "You? The murderer? You'll curse her." But he walked past their fear and knelt beside the woman. His voice was soft. "By the truth I now live, by the harm I have abandoned. May you and your child be safe." And she was. The birth was clean, the child strong. From that day, the whispers began to change. Years later, the man once known as Angulimala became a teacher of peace. He lived quietly, he sat often, he spoke gently. Children no longer feared him. Old men bowed to him, mothers called upon him for blessings. But he never forgot the garland, never forgot the sword. They were not trophies. They were reminders of how far a man can fall and how far a soul can rise. When his final day came, it was quiet. The monks gathered near. He sat upright, as always, in meditation. He did not cry, did not call out. He simply exhaled, one long, peaceful breath, and let go. And in that final stillness, the forest that once whispered his name in fear, now whispered something else, forgiveness. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those plains. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes. He had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. The wind in Lumbini moved gently, like breath held between 2 worlds. It was spring. The trees were in bloom, and the sal branches swayed with the weight of 1,000 white blossoms, drifting like snow through sunlight. The grove itself had always been sacred, but on this day it held its breath, because something was about to happen. Queen Maya of Kapilavastu had travelled far. Her time was near, and by custom, she had chosen to give birth in her family's village. The journey had been long, but gentle. Attendants walked quietly beside her. The sky stayed clear, and the earth itself seemed to soften beneath their steps. When they reached Lumbini, Maya smiled. Here, the air was different, cooler, still. The light filtered through the trees in beams so soft they looked like silk. She stepped down from her carriage, removed her sandals, and walked barefoot into the grove. Birds did not flee. They simply paused. At the center of the grove stood a tall sal tree, wide-branched and flowering. She reached for a low branch and rested her hand upon it. She did not cry out. She did not tremble. She breathed. And there, beneath the trees upon the earth in silence, a child was born. He did not enter with a cry. He entered with awareness. His eyes opened wide, dark and deep like the night before rain. His skin was said to shine with a glow not of this world, and the breeze, once soft, began to stir the leaves as if to sing. Attendants rushed forward. The midwife covered her mouth. The sky turned golden for a breath, and legend says that the flowers on the sal tree bent low to witness. The child did not wait to be carried. He stood. He took 7 steps, and with each step, where his foot touched the ground, a lotus bloomed. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real. Petals unfurled beneath his heels. Fragrance filled the air, and the world paused. Animals stopped their grazing, streams paused their song, and even the wind, surprised by the holiness of the moment, turned back to watch. When the 7th step was taken, the boy raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth. And in a voice that was not learned but remembered, he said, "In this life, I am born for the benefit of all beings. This is my final birth. I will put an end to suffering." It is said that the Devas, gods of distant realms, gathered in silence, their hands folded, their eyes lowered, because something rare had occurred. A bodhisattva, fully awakened in past lives, had returned to walk the earth once more. Heavenly flowers fell through the air. Trumpets sounded without instruments. Celestial beings whispered blessings the humans could not hear. And yet even those on earth, who had no names for such wonders, felt the shift. One man wept without knowing why. One horse knelt in its harness. A pot of rice boiled over though no fire was lit. Something had entered the world, something ancient, and entirely new. He was named Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. In his small face, those who looked closely saw both softness and strength, an ocean of stillness behind the movements of a child. He did not laugh more or cry less than other babies, but when he looked into your eyes, it felt as though he saw through the lifetimes you had forgotten. Queen Maya held him close, felt his heartbeat against her own, but in her heart she knew this child did not belong only to her. He belonged to the world. Word of the birth traveled quickly. When the child was only days old, the king summoned the wise sages of the land. Among them came Asita, an old hermit who lived in the mountains, wrapped in robes the color of ash, with eyes that had watched the turning of many seasons. He entered the palace slowly, carried no staff, asked no favor. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, Asita's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He bowed low before the infant. And when he rose, he turned to the king. "This child will not rule a kingdom. He will rule the heart. He will not wield armies. He will end suffering. He is destined to become a Buddha, an awakened one. He will show the way beyond sorrow. But I will not live to see his teaching. That is my only sadness." and he bowed once more. The room fell still. Even the oil lamps seemed to lean closer. The king said nothing. The queen held her son more tightly. Maya did not live long after the birth. Some say it was her karma to return to the celestial realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a world, and some bodies are made only to hold such grace for a little while. Others say she became his guardian spirit, that she watched from beyond the veil, her presence in every breeze that cooled his fever, every bird that sang outside his window. Siddhartha was raised by her sister. He grew in the lap of comfort. But the memory of the grove, the trees, the moonlit dream, those lived on. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he never spoke often of his birth. He taught of suffering, of the path, of breath, of impermanence. But once, when asked what it meant that he had walked on lotus blossoms, he smiled and said, "The path was already beneath me. I did not make it appear, I only stepped where it had always been. Because truth is not invented, it is remembered. Like petals underfoot, waiting to be noticed. And so the child who walked on lotus blossoms became the man who taught others to walk in peace. One step, then another, until suffering too began to bloom into wisdom. The forest was silent. A slow dawn brushed the canopy with gold, and the earth exhaled the cool breath of night. Beneath the tall trees, a single figure sat unmoving, his presence vast, his stillness deeper than the roots below him. This was Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of great action. Where Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world, Samantabhadra responds, not just with compassion, but with commitment, with vow, with doing. In Sanskrit, his name means universal worthy. He is the embodiment of enlightened action, not theoretical, but lived. In temples across East Asia, he is depicted riding a white elephant with 6 tusks, each representing one of the 6 paramitas, perfections of a bodhisattva: generosity, discipline, patience, vigor, meditation, wisdom. The elephant is steady, strong, humble. It does not race. It carries, because the path of action is not haste. It is devotion. Samantabhadra is not remembered for miracles. He is remembered for vows. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, a vision of infinite Buddhas and worlds, he stands before countless beings and declares, "I vow to honor all Buddhas, to make offerings, to confess mistakes, to rejoice in goodness, to request teaching, to stay in the world, to follow the path, to live for others, to turn the wheel of Dharma, to dedicate all merit for the awakening of all beings." 10 vast vows, 10 immeasurable currents of action. And still, he made more, because Samantabhadra's compassion does not stop at feeling, it becomes form. There's a story told in the mountains of Sichuan. A wandering monk came to a temple where the image of Samantabhadra stood tall, ornate, golden, seated atop the elephant. The monk bowed, then whispered, "Great Bodhisattva, what is your practice?" And in his mind, a voice replied, "Whatever brings benefit, I do it." The monk frowned. "But how do I know what will help?" The voice was soft. "When your mind forgets the self, every step becomes service." This is the heart of Samantabhadra, not just knowing what is good, but doing it. Even when tired, even when no one sees, even when the benefit is invisible. Some bodhisattvas sit in meditation, others speak sutras. Samantabhadra cleans the floor, carries the sick, plants trees he will never see grow, because his practice is not abstract. It is bodily, it is effort, and it is choice. In the West, we often associate wisdom with silence, stillness, detachment. But Mahayana Buddhism offers a different view. That wisdom and action are not separate. That the awakened mind moves, not compulsively, but naturally, like water down a mountain. Samantabhadra teaches, if you bow, bow completely. If you eat, eat with gratitude. If you work, work with your whole body. If you vow, live the vow. A novice once asked a Zen master, "What is the most advanced form of practice?" The master pointed to the broom, then to the rice pot, then to the novice's own worn sandals. "Whatever needs doing," he said, "do it completely." In this way, Samantabhadra is not lofty. He is practical. He does not ask you to fly. He asks you to stay grounded and keep going, to help even one being, to smile even once for someone who is suffering, to remember that in a single action, sweeping, bowing, cooking, there can be immeasurable merit when done with a mind of service. There's a teaching. A bodhisattva never asks, "Will this be noticed?" A bodhisattva asks, "Does this help?" In modern life, we are busy. We're taught to measure action by its results, but Samantabhadra teaches boundless action, where the result is not yours to keep, where the act itself is enough. Where planting a seed you'll never see flower is not foolish. It is sacred. Commentary. Samantabhadra is not a figure on a pedestal. He is a mirror. He shows us that enlightenment is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, fully awake, with sleeves rolled, with hands open, with vows not recited but lived. The white elephant is not fast, but it is strong. It does not seek applause. It just walks, one foot after the other, one act after the next, and the bodhisattva upon it smiles. Because every breath is part of the vow. To follow Samantabhadra is not to be perfect. It is to be willing, to step forward, to show up, to fall down, and vow again. Because the path is long, but every step walked in service becomes joy. The sun shimmered over the canopy of an ancient forest, casting dappled light onto the wide, glistening river that snaked through its heart. The air was rich with the scent of ripe fruit and warm leaves. Birds called lazily from the branches, and deep in this green sanctuary, there lived a great band of monkeys, free, agile, unafraid. They were led by a king, not crowned with gold nor seated on a throne, but known by every heart in the jungle as a being of rare strength, deep wisdom, and boundless love. He was the Buddha in a past life, and his name was whispered with reverence among the trees. Mahakapi, the great monkey king. The troop followed him not out of fear, but from trust. He chose the ripest fruit for the weakest among them. He led them across rivers in flood. He taught the young how to leap, and the old how to rest. And when predators stalked the forest floor, he stood between his people and the teeth of death. But even such noble creatures cannot stay hidden from the eyes of kings. Far downstream, where the river widened and palace walls gleamed under the sun, there lived a human king. He was wealthy, powerful, and restless. One morning, while drinking sweet water from a golden cup, he bit into a mango unlike any he had tasted. Its flesh was fragrant, smooth, almost glowing. He turned to his servants, astonished. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. A trembling servant bowed low. "From the northern forest, Your Majesty. It was carried by the river." The king stood. "Then that forest shall be mine." And so he rode, hundreds of soldiers at his back, their armor clinking like distant thunder. Across plains, over hills, and into the great northern woods they marched, until they reached the grove where the mango tree stood. Its branches curved wide, heavy with golden fruit. And high in its arms, the monkeys feasted. The king looked up, and his joy turned to fury. "They steal what is mine," he said. "Surround the tree. Not one escapes." His archers raised their bows. The monkeys screamed and scrambled. Some fell. Some clung to the bark, trembling. Mothers shielded their babies. The tree that had fed them now became a trap. And the Monkey King, Mahakapi, watched from a distance. He saw the ring of soldiers, the drawn bows, the trembling hearts of his people, and he knew there was no way down. Unless he climbed a tall cliff beside the river. From there he could see the mango tree, the forest, the fear. He wrapped his legs around the trunk of a strong bamboo stalk, measured the distance, and leapt. Across the sky he soared, limbs outstretched, heart steady. He reached the tree, but not the ground. His body caught a branch, and he hung there, arms extended, back arched across the gulf between safety and slaughter. A living bridge. He turned his head and called out, "Go! Cross me, now!" One by one, the monkeys scrambled onto his back. They clutched his fur, their tiny hands trembling. Some hesitated. Some wept. But they crossed, from danger to safety, over the back of the king who held and held and held, until the last one was gone. In the grove below, the human king had seen everything. He watched the great monkey fly, watched him cling, watched him bear the weight of an entire nation, and now he watched him fall. The Monkey King's body gave out, muscles torn, spine twisted. He collapsed at the base of the tree, breath shallow, limbs crumpled like leaves after a storm. The human king approached, silent. This was not the enemy he imagined. This was not a beast. This was something else. He knelt. The Monkey King opened his eyes. "You could have run," the human king whispered. "You could have saved yourself." The monkey breathed barely. But what would a king be without his people? Tears welled in the king's eyes. He had marched to conquer, to taste fruit, to claim land. But he had found something far richer: honor, selflessness, sacrifice. He turned to his soldiers. "Tend to him," he ordered. "Treat him with care." But it was too late. The Monkey King's breath slowed, and then stopped. The human king built a shrine there, beneath the mango tree, not for conquest, not for glory, but for a being who had shown him what true kingship meant. And from that day on, he ruled differently. Not with fear, but with wisdom. Not with pride, but with service. He remembered the curve of that body stretched across space, the silence in which it held, the lesson it gave. Centuries later, the story would be carved into stone, painted onto temple walls, and passed from one mouth to another like a sacred fruit. Children would ask, "Is it true? Did a monkey really give his life?" And the elders would smile. "Yes," they'd say, "and in doing so, he taught the world how to live." Because sacrifice is not weakness, it is strength in its purest form. And a leader is not the one who commands the most, but the one willing to give the most, even his life, for those who trust him, for the good of all. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a man who lived in poverty. His shoes were worn, his coat threadbare, his belly often empty, and his hands always calloused. But he had a friend, kind and wealthy, who loved him deeply. One day this friend came to visit. They shared a meal, laughed like children, and drank until the poor man fell asleep in contentment. Before leaving, the friend saw how hard the man's life had become. So he quietly took a jewel, a priceless, radiant stone, and stitched it inside the lining of the man's robe. He said nothing. He simply left the gift where it could not be lost. Years passed. The poor man wandered, worked, begged, slept beneath bridges and woke in alleyways. He remained convinced he had nothing, never knowing that a treasure was sewn into his own clothing. He suffered, all while wealth brushed against his ribs, all while forgetting what he already carried. Then one day the two friends met again, and when the rich man saw the state of his companion, he cried out, "Why have you lived this way? Don't you remember? I gave you everything. The jewel has been with you this whole time." The poor man froze. His hands trembled as he turned the robe inside out. And there, nestled in the seam, untouched and waiting, was the jewel. This is a parable from the Lotus Sutra, and it is not about wealth, it is about Buddha nature. It is about the truth we already carry, but forget. The man is all of us, wandering, doubting, working endlessly to find meaning, purpose, belonging, thinking we must earn it, thinking we must seek it, never realizing we were born with the jewel. We never lacked it, we only forgot to look. Buddha nature is not something to gain. It is not granted to the worthy, it is already here, in the one who chants, in the one who steals, in the one who weeps in shame, in the one who laughs too loudly in the back of the zendo. The jewel shines equally. It does not discriminate. In Mahayana Buddhism, this parable is a teaching of Tathagatagarbha, the womb of Buddhahood. It means that all beings, no matter how lost, carry the seed of awakening, not as potential, but as reality. Already whole, already luminous, already stitched into the lining of our very being. The problem is not that we are broken. The problem is that we believe we are broken. And so we search, outside, in teachers, in techniques, in titles, in temporary comforts, all while the jewel sits quietly inside, waiting. There's a saying in Zen, don't seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. Because the more we chase, the farther we run from what is already still. In the story, the friend does not blame. He simply says, "Look." That is the role of the teacher, not to give you the jewel, but to remind you it's there, to show you the thread, to help you turn your robe inside out. Even your flaws are not flaws. They are fabric. Even your pain is not proof of lack. It is the tension in the thread that protects the jewel. Even your delusion is a path, if you let it lead you inward. The poor man's mistake wasn't laziness. It was forgetting his inheritance, just like us. We forget we are enough. We forget we are worthy. We forget that what we seek has always been with us. Buddhism is not about becoming holy. It is about remembering who you are, who you've always been, what cannot be taken from you. Not by grief, not by failure, not by your own darkest thoughts. Sometimes people ask, but if I already have Buddha nature, why practice? And the answer is simple: to remember, to loosen the thread, to notice the glimmer, to stop walking past yourself like a stranger. Commentary: the jewel is not hard to find, but it is easy to overlook, because it does not shout. It does not sparkle in the usual light. It sits in the quietest part of you and waits for you to be still enough to feel it. You may not believe this yet. That's okay. Belief is not required. Only curiosity, only the courage to look inside the robe and ask, what if I am already whole? In a monastery garden, a novice once asked the teacher, "Where can I find the Buddha?" The teacher pointed to the ground. Toes. Then to the novice's chest, heart. Then to the novice's eyes. Everywhere you see, but especially where you never thought to look. You have the jewel. So now, stop asking how to earn it. Start asking how to honor it. Live from it. Speak from it. Let it shape your steps. And when others forget their own jewels, remind them gently. Just like the friend did. In a small mountain village, there lived an old flute maker named Rin. He worked alone in a simple hut of wood and clay, high on the ridge where the wind whispered through pine trees and children ran barefoot through the fields below. People came from far away to buy his flutes. Not because they were beautiful, though they were. Not because they were perfect, though they were close. But because something in them felt alive. One day, a young monk came to visit. He had heard stories of Rin's flutes, how some made people weep, others laugh, and one even caused a dog to howl in tune. The monk bowed and asked, "Master Rin, what makes your flutes so special?" Rin smiled without answering. Instead, he handed the monk a piece of smooth bamboo, carved, polished, hollow. "Blow," he said. The monk lifted the flute and tried. A weak, wheezing note escaped, thin as a whisper. Rin nodded. Again. The monk tried again, and again. Each time, the sound changed, until finally a single clear note rang out, clean as the mountain air. Rin nodded. You see? The music does not come from the bamboo. It comes from the emptiness inside it, and from the way you breathe. This is the story of form and emptiness, and how what is useful is not the thing itself, but the space it holds. Commentary. The flute is made of matter, but what gives it purpose? Not the wood, not the shape, not the polish. It is the emptiness within. shaped just right, so that when breath enters, it becomes sound. So too with us. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." To the ordinary ear, that sounds like a riddle. To the listening heart, it is truth. Your body is form. Your thoughts are form. Your emotions, your stories, your name, they all arise from conditions, but none of them are you. They are the flute. What makes them meaningful is the awareness that moves through them, like breath through bamboo. Emptiness is not nothing. It is potential. It is the space in a cup that holds the tea, the silence between notes that makes a melody, the pause before words that gives them power. Rin once said to the monk, "Most people think meaning comes from fullness, but it comes from what is left open." The monk stayed for many weeks. Each morning he swept the hut, carried water, sat in stillness while Rin carved. One afternoon he asked, "Can I make one?" Rin handed him a piece of bamboo and nodded. The monk worked slowly, cutting, hollowing, shaping. It took days. When he finished, he brought it to Rin. The old man held it up to the light, blew a note. It was off, slightly strained, slightly flat. Rin smiled. "Too tight," he said. "You feared the emptiness, so you made it small." The monk stared at his work, then quietly broke it open. Started again. In meditation, we often try to fill the mind, with effort, with silence, with ideas of what awakening should be. But the deeper path is not filling. It is hollowing, letting go, trusting that when the space is clear, truth will flow through, like breath through a flute. Rin never became famous. He never left the mountain. But the sound of his flutes travelled far, across rivers, over cities, into temples, because what he crafted was not just bamboo. He crafted emptiness given shape. When Rin passed away, the villagers held no grand ceremony. They placed his tools in a wooden box, left a single flute on his pillow, and when the wind blew through the hut, it made the faintest sound, a high, pure note, like something remembering its shape. So next time you feel broken, too empty to be useful, too hollow to matter, remember, the hollow reed sings, the empty cup holds, the quiet breath becomes a song. The master was dying, not suddenly, not tragically, just quietly, like a season completing itself. His name was Master Togen, and he had taught for over 40 years. He never raised his voice, never insisted, never asked to be followed. But people came to him, pilgrims, monks, farmers, children, because when he looked at you, you felt seen beyond your name. Now, his breath was thin, his hands still, his body a whisper of what it once was. The disciples gathered at his bedside, each wondering the same thing. Would he speak? Would he leave them with one final truth? A farewell teaching? A verse? A koan? They waited, hearts leaning forward. But Master Togen said nothing, not even a word. He only gestured, weakly, to the small table beside his mat. Upon it stood a single candle, lit and steady. The wax had melted low. The flame burned soft but sure. The master's eyes lingered on it. Then he closed them. and let go. The room held its breath. The disciples watched the candle. It flickered once, then twice, and just as the master's body cooled, the candle went out. No wind, no touch. It simply ended. This is the story of teaching through presence, of the final lesson not spoken, but lived. Commentary. We often believe the greatest teachings must be loud, dramatic, revolutionary, clear. But in Zen, the most profound truths are quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with the stillness of a candle extinguishing itself. Master Togen's disciples wanted words, something to cling to quote, to remember. But he gave them something deeper, a mirror. The candle was his body, burning with presence, giving light, warming others, and when its time came, it did not resist, it did not protest, it simply completed its purpose and disappeared. That is the nature of life. To arrive, to offer, to pass. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to awaken. Some monks cried. Some stared at the floor. But one young disciple remained still, eyes on the wick. He bowed deeply and said, "I understand." The abbot later asked him, "What did you understand?" The young monk replied, "Nothing lasts, but everything lights the way while it's here." We fear death, but what we fear more is the idea of being forgotten, of being meaningless. So we seek last words, final victories, something to prove we existed. But Master Togen left only a flame, because the point was not to be remembered. It was to burn fully while here. The candle did not save its wax, did not ration its glow. It gave everything, slowly, humbly, until there was nothing left to give. And then it bowed out. That was his teaching. There is a Zen phrase, "When the light is gone, do not seek it in the ashes." The disciples learned this that day, not from a sermon, but from the absence that remained. Master Togen lives on, not in statues, not in scriptures, not in recorded sayings, but in how the monks now move. With care, with presence, with awareness that each moment is a wick, each breath a flame. So when your time comes, be like the candle. Don't worry about your legacy. Focus on your light. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. She was just the cleaning woman. That's what most called her. Not nun, not practitioner, not devotee, just the woman who swept the temple. She arrived before sunrise, her hair tied back in a grey knot, her robes plain and faded, her broom worn thin at the bristles. She did not chant, did not preach, did not study sutras in the main hall. She swept the stone walkways, the meditation hall. The steps no one noticed were dusty until they were clean. And when she swept, she smiled. Some of the younger monks whispered, "She's not really practicing. She doesn't even sit in the morning zazen. She just does chores." But she never responded. She bowed to them anyway. Years passed. One by one, the monks left for higher temples, deeper study, more advanced masters. But she remained, still sweeping, still silent, still smiling. One spring morning, the abbot called for an assembly. The monks gathered, some sitting in strict posture, others blinking away sleep. The abbot raised his voice gently. "I have been observing this temple for many years," he said. "And in all this time, only one among you has reached the heart of the Dharma." Heads turned. The scholars straightened their backs. The meditation leaders adjusted their robes. The younger monks held their breath. And then the abbot looked to her, the woman with the broom. She was in the corner, brushing dust from the edge of a wooden beam. She paused, looked up, and smiled. A silence fell over the room. Then whispers. But she never studied the Diamond Sutra. She never debates koans. She doesn't even recite the Heart Sutra. The abbot turned to them and said, "She lives it." This is the story of embodied wisdom, the kind that doesn't speak loudly, but moves like breath through a humble act. Commentary. There is a great misunderstanding in spiritual life, that awakening comes only through texts, or teachers, or temples. But the Buddha taught in forests. He sat beneath trees. He pointed to rivers and mountains and empty bowls. He said, "The way is not in the sky. The way is in the heart." The woman who swept the temple did not need to talk about mindfulness. She was mindfulness. Every stroke of her broom was deliberate. Every step a prayer. Every breath a chant. She did not perform her devotion. She lived it. You can memorize every scripture and still miss the truth. You can quote the sutras and still live with bitterness. But you cannot sweep the floor with love for 30 years and not be changed. The Dharma is not performance. It is not approval. It is presence. Many monks seek truth like a prize. They strive. They compare. They seek recognition. But the woman who swept the temple had no audience, no ambition, only a broom, a path, and her attention. That is enough. That is more than enough. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." Because the truth doesn't take you away from the world. It brings you deeper into it. It makes you pay attention. To dust in corners, to the sound of your own breath, to how gently you place a bowl on the table. We live in a time of noise, of opinions, of spectacle, of credentials. But the Dharma whispers, sweep, breathe, smile, and mean it. That is enough. So wherever you are, whether folding laundry, washing dishes, answering emails, tying your child's shoes, do it with all of you. Do it like the woman who swept the temple, and let the dust be your teacher too. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl. And in his eyes, there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, this should not have happened to me. The monks were very quiet now. But what if we saw all boats as empty? He asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, a bird called out once, then fell silent again. When another insults you, the Buddha said, they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance. He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. Blessed One, he asked, but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat? The Buddha nodded. Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see. He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, you are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury. The Buddha smiled gently. Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step. He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it. Know its shape. See how it arises. And know this: it does not belong to you. The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. You are not the boat, the Buddha said. You are not the current. You are not even the river. He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows. A few monks closed their eyes. To let go of the self is not to disappear, he said. It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot. He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monks sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarreled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly. Letting go, not to vanish, but to float. Still, aware, unmoved by the waves of the world. Like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing. The monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads. Frogs croaked low from the shadows. And above it all, the scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. There are those, he said, who come to the Dharma like a man searching for a serpent. A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. This man, the Buddha continued, is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands. A few younger monks leaned forward. What happens? One whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. He seizes the snake by the tail. A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. And the snake, he said, twists and strikes. He paused. And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly, grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred. Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. "Imagine," he said, "a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge, so he gathers branches, grass, and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft." The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. "No," said the Buddha. "He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air. So too is the Dharma," he said, "a raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear." A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. "But some," he continued, "treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore." He turned his palm upward. "They say, 'I know,' you do not. They say, 'This is the only way, yours is wrong.' They say, 'I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered.'" He paused. "But what have they understood?" A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. "Understanding," he said, "is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched." He looked at them all. "Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand." A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. "But Blessed One," he said, "what if one clings to the raft out of reverence, out of gratitude?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Reverence is not the same as attachment," he said. "Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream." He folded his hands in his lap. "To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose and move on when it has been fulfilled." Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. "But Lord," he said, "should we not defend the Dharma from false views?" "Yes," said the Buddha without hesitation. "But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path." He looked directly at Sati. "If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail." He turned to the group once more. "If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail. If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail. The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. And when the snake turns and bites, the Buddha asked, "You will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame." A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. "I have clutched many tails in my time," he said, "but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly." The Buddha nodded. That is the beginning of wisdom. That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, "I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise." The boy looked at him. "And now?" Sati stared at the flames. "Now I wonder if I even know how to listen." In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. "Do not grasp the tail, learn how the snake moves." And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. It began in the hush before dawn, when the breath of the world still rested, and time itself seemed unsure whether to move forward. In the palace of Kapilavastu, marble pillars loomed like frozen trees, casting long shadows across the corridors. Every corner, every curtain, every tapestry whispered of wealth and beauty. But the prince, Siddhartha, had stopped hearing the music in it. He had seen what no prince was meant to see: old age, sickness, death, and a seeker who walked without fear. In the days that followed the four sights, Siddhartha moved through the palace like a man carrying a secret too heavy to name. He sat through the court banquets without appetite. He watched dancers move in silk, their feet light as feathers, but his thoughts moved heavier than stone. Yasodhara, his wife, had noticed his silence. She placed her hand gently over his, but it trembled. Rahula, their newborn son, reached for him with tiny fingers, but Siddhartha's eyes filled with both love and sorrow. He did not lack affection, he lacked answers. That night the moon hung low and golden in the sky, a silent witness to the choice being made within royal walls. The city of Kapilavastu lay sleeping, its gates shut, its guards at rest, its people dreaming of festivals and fortunes. But inside Siddhartha's chamber, there was no sleep. He stood over his son's cradle, his gaze long and quiet. Rahula stirred, then stilled again. Siddhartha touched the boy's cheek, memorizing the softness. A father's heart broke quietly inside him. A part of him longed to stay, to watch this child grow, to hold Yasodhara as the years passed. But another part of him, the deeper part, knew that to truly love them, he had to leave, not for escape, not for abandonment, but to find an end to the suffering that would one day find them all. He crossed the chamber in silence, his footsteps bare. He passed the sleeping guards with a nod of gratitude. He paused once in the marble garden, where fountains trickled like stilled song. Stars wheeled above him in still constellations. Waiting at the outer gate was Channa, his loyal charioteer, and Kantaka, his white horse who had carried him through battles, festivals, and boyhood rides under open skies. Siddhartha took one last look at the palace that had been his whole world. Then he nodded. No orders, no drums, no farewell speech, just stillness and the beginning of something eternal. Channa led them through side streets. Siddhartha's cloak billowed slightly in the breeze, though the air was warm. As they neared the city gates, it is said the gods themselves descended to still the sound of hooves and hinges. The gatekeeper slept on, unaware that the one who was born to inherit the throne was walking away from it forever. Miles passed beneath them, past farmlands and shrines, past temples and banyan trees, and as dawn neared, they reached the forest's edge. There, beneath a fig tree bathed in pale starlight, Siddhartha dismounted. He stepped away from the saddle and removed his crown. It was heavy, not in gold, but in memory. He untied his earrings and placed them gently in Channa's hands. Then, drawing his sword, he cut away his long, dark hair, symbol of his royalty, of his past. He let the strands fall into the wind. He removed his silken robes, folding them with reverence, and exchanged them for a simple cloth robe, earth-coloured and plain. Then he turned to Channa. "Take Kantaka home," he said softly. "Tell my father I have not left in rebellion, but in search of that which is beyond birth and death." Channa's eyes filled with tears. "My lord, may I not follow you?" Siddhartha placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You will serve the Dharma more by returning than by following. Go. Tell them I am not lost. Tell them I am becoming." It is said that Kantaka cried as he was led away. Some say the noble horse died of grief, his heart broken by parting. Others say his spirit was reborn among the stars. But Siddhartha did not look back. Barefoot, stripped of every title and comfort, he stepped into the forest. Birds stirred in the canopy. Mist hung low over the earth. The world ahead was wild and wide, but in that moment, he felt lighter than he ever had. No walls, no servants, no titles, just breathe, and the path. He walked deeper, alone, the forest accepting him without question. He drank from rivers, sat beneath trees, listened to wind move through leaves. He began to study with sages and ascetics, learning from their fire rituals and their breath practices, their renunciations and their silences. He fasted until his ribs showed like shadows. He sat still until ants walked over his knees. But in all this, he remained watchful. For he knew that extreme indulgence had not brought peace. And now he saw that extreme denial did not either. His journey would continue, but it had already begun. The great departure was not just a leaving, it was a shedding. Not just of privilege, but of illusion. The prince became a wanderer. The air became a seeker, and the world, though it did not know it yet, was about to change. Because one man had dared to step outside the gates and walk silently, humbly toward truth. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tall holder. just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened, its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life." A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, the flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, 'Better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness.' But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises." In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker. Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary. The candle and the wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft, and lit, even when the conditions shift. Even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same. But sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, "I am still here." The teacher once said, "A candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. so be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are. Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free. This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms, male, female, neither, all, because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts, his arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. I have failed, he whispered. I cannot save them all. But the universe listens in strange ways, and just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth. Gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure, only this: you broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real. And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world, because even in despair, he did not turn away, because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless, especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride, just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol: a wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only two hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just two hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the Bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara. Not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. When you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love, you become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable, a simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it. afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble, tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say, "This is who I am." But who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? Hospice is not loud. It hums like twilight. Low lights, quiet steps, gentle beeping. And in room 7, the breathing was slow. Draw in, pause, let go. Again, the man in the bed was old, thin skin, tired eyes. Hands that had once built houses and held babies and shaken enemies' hands. Now they simply rested, still, soft, folded like leaves. Nora was his nurse, not young, not old. Calm eyes, a voice like warm water. She didn't rush, didn't flinch at grief. She moved like someone who had seen many endings and knew each one was different. This is not a story of drama. It's a story of breath, and the lesson it teaches when it leaves. The man, his name was Harold, had no visitors that week. His wife had passed years ago. Children scattered, caught in their own lives. Nora checked his vitals. fluffed his pillow, placed a cool cloth on his forehead. He looked at her once and said, "I'm afraid to let go." She didn't respond with philosophy, didn't offer reassurances. She just said, "Let's breathe together then." They sat in silence. Inhale, pause, exhale, again. Harold's breath was jagged at first, then smoother, then softer. He didn't need words. She didn't need noise. The Buddha once said, "As a flame blown out by the wind, so quiet is the mind of one who has understood." That night, Nora came back during her break, brought a small wooden statue, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. She set it by the window. "Just someone to keep you company," she whispered. Harold blinked in thanks. As the hours passed, his breath grew shallow. Draw in, pause, let go, and one moment. The pause lasted longer. Nora leaned in. Stillness. No panic, no alarm, just the hush of release. She sat beside him for a while after, not because it was protocol, but because endings deserve presence too. Later, she cleaned the room gently, changed the sheets, lit a small candle, and placed the statue back in her pocket. Another nurse asked her, "How do you do this every day? Doesn't it get heavy?" Nora smiled softly. "It's not about carrying. It's about letting go over and over, until even the grief becomes quiet." People think death is about final moments, but in truth, it's about how you breathe until you no longer need to. Harold had taught her something, not in words, but in how he met the moment, afraid, then still, then gone. The next morning, Nora placed a sticky note in her locker. It read, "Let go like breath." Just a reminder of what Harold gave back to her. In this life, we inhale ambition, loss, joy, sorrow. We hold so tightly. But the final wisdom is the exhale. Not to disappear, but to return everything we borrowed. Long ago, in a kingdom ringed by mountains and temples, a mighty king ruled from a palace of stone and gold. He was feared by his enemies, praised by poets, and followed by thousands. His armies stretched across the land. His wealth filled entire chambers, and his commands echoed through cities like thunder. But still, he was restless. Victory brought no peace. Praise faded quickly. Even sleep, wrapped in silk and guarded by soldiers, felt hollow. And so one morning, while gazing out across his kingdom from a marble balcony, the king spoke aloud. "Who in this world is greater than I?" A servant, sweeping quietly nearby, paused. "There is one," he said softly, eyes downcast. The king turned sharply. "Who?" "A sage," said the servant. "He lives alone in the forest, wears no crown, owns no gold. But they say he holds more peace in his silence than all your generals in battle." The king laughed. "A beggar in the woods, greater than me." But something in the servant's voice lingered. And later that night, when the court had gone quiet, the king summoned his best horse and rode out alone, disguised in simple robes, his face shadowed by the hood of a traveller. He rode for 2 days, through thick jungle, across rivers, past farmers and monks and children who did not bow. Finally, at the edge of a still grove, he saw a small hut beneath a Bodhi tree, and outside it, seated cross-legged on a flat stone, was the sage. No guards, no roof over his head, no possessions, just stillness and eyes that did not flicker when the king approached. "You are the one they speak of?" the king asked. The sage nodded once. "I am one, of many." The king studied him. "You have no palace, no army, no throne, and yet people speak your name in reverence. Why?" The sage said nothing. The silence stretched, long enough for the king to feel his own voice echo. Finally, the sage opened his palm and motioned for the king to sit. The king hesitated, then obeyed. They sat together under the tree, as the wind moved gently through the leaves. No words, no commands, just presence. After a long while, the king said, "You are not afraid of me." "I see no king," said the sage, "only a man with questions." The king frowned. "I have conquered lands, broken enemies, shaped history. You think I have questions?" The sage met his eyes. "Then why are you here?" The king opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. Because beneath the silk, beneath the crowns, beneath the noise, he had come not to test the sage, but to understand something he could not command. Finally, he asked, "Why do people follow you?" "I do not ask them to." "Then why do they listen?" The sage picked up a small stone from the earth, rolled it in his fingers. "They listen," he said, "because I have no need for them to." The king blinked. "I lead armies, command cities, hold power over life and death, but still I'm not content." The sage nodded. "Because you mistake fear for respect, obedience for love, wealth for worth." The king stiffened. "Are you saying I am not powerful?" "I am saying," the sage said gently, "that true power does not cling, it does not shout, it does not fear being forgotten." They sat again in silence. The wind stirred the sage's robe. The king looked down at his hands. "I have everything," he said, "but still I feel empty." The sage smiled. "Then you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To lead without needing to be above." That evening, the king returned to his palace. No fanfare, no declaration, but something had changed. He began to listen more, to speak less, to ask questions instead of giving orders. His advisors whispered about his visits to temples, his long walks alone, his sudden interest in sitting beneath trees without speaking. And when his generals asked, "Who taught you this?" he said simply, "A man with nothing, who showed me everything." Years later, when the sage passed into silence beneath the same Bodhi tree, the king declared a day of stillness across the land. No work, no speech, just listening. And in time, his own rule became a story of its own, not because he expanded borders, but because he stopped needing to, not because he gained more, but because he learned to let go. And the story of the king and the sage spread like the breeze that once moved through the forest leaves. A reminder that the crown is not the source of power, wisdom is, and the one who does not seek to rule is often the one most worthy to lead. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. At the edge of the monastery was a pond. Small, shallow, ringed with moss-covered stones. No fish swam in it. No lilies bloomed. It was quiet, so quiet you could hear dragonflies land on its surface. The monks would pass it daily on the way to morning meditation. Most gave it no thought. But one monk, young, curious, still a little wild in the heart, began to stop beside it each dawn. He would pick up a pebble, hold it, feel its weight, then toss it gently into the still water, and each time he would watch the ripples move outward, soft circles expanding from the center until they kissed the edges of the pond and vanished. One morning, the head teacher stood beside him. "You throw a pebble every day," he said. "Why?" The young monk didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I think I'm watching how something so small still affects everything." The teacher smiled, bent down, picked up his own stone, and said, "Every thought, every word, every action is a pebble in the pond of life." Then he let it fall. Ripples. The young monk began to understand that karma is not punishment or reward. It's simply the rippling of causes. What you do echoes. What you think spreads. Even in silence, something moves outward from you. That evening, while sweeping the courtyard, the young monk accidentally knocked over a jug of water. It splashed against the steps of the shrine. He froze, panicked, but the teacher, watching nearby, only nodded. "You see," he said, "another ripple, but not all ripples are wrong. Just seen." The monk began to practice more carefully. Not just his posture, but his thoughts. He noticed how anger, even when not spoken, changed the air around him. How a quiet smile offered to a passerby lingered like incense. One day, a traveler came to the monastery. Troubled, distracted, unable to sit still during meditation. The young monk didn't say much, just poured him tea, listened, and as the man left, bowed gently. Later, the traveler returned, calmer. He said, "I don't know what helped me, but something about your silence made me feel still. A ripple. Not grand, not loud, just a movement born from presence." There is a story in Zen. A student asked, "How do I change the world?" The teacher replied, "Change the shape of the stone you drop into it." The young monk continued to visit the pond, but now he didn't throw pebbles each day. Sometimes he just sat, watching the water hold its breath. Because he understood now, it's not always about making ripples. Sometimes it's about learning to be still enough to feel them. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him. Always responsive. Always ready. Always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction. A warning, like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP Is. By 4 p.m., his eyes burned. By 6 p.m., he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m., room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed, greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. "Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all." Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes it's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen?" Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly, because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness. A wave is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless, but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow. All temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveller reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.